All right, so our Periphery Pandemonium event has come and gone, and boy, was it fun. For those of you who didn't watch the last video, go to the link below and you'll see a little kind of overview. It's about 20 minutes long of what we did. It's a more in-depth dive. I'm going to do a quick overview here at the beginning of this video, but we're more in-depth on the back end. And then I'm going to get into like how the event went, the games I played, and how our team ultimately did. So it was a 4-faction narrative tournament, you could say, but it was a team tournament. So the way that worked was you were playing one of 4 factions. That was Marian Hegemony, the Magistry of Canopus, the Pirates, or the Taurian Concordat. So those were the 4 factions, and the idea was that Comstars pulled all their militia troops, border troops, Com Guard to go fight the Battle of Tukied, and all the periphery states are taking full advantage of that, and they're trying to get Comstar tech, loot, and mechs, right? And then when they show up, there's other periphery states there that they got to fight against, right? So, and then what happened is you played 3 games over the course of the day, and then they added up your team's total score, right? So if I scored 4 points in a game and my partners each scored 2, that would be a total of 12 points. And I might be playing up against a faction that scored 13 points. And even though I beat a player, I might lose because my teammates didn't do as well, or vice versa, right? So you're all kind of relying on each other. So you brought 300 points, and then you also got 3 free foot infantry. Now, those infantry had to be foot infantry. I ended up bringing Atlas 7D, Grasshopper 5N, a Maxim heavy hover transport, the SRM4 variant, a J. Edgar MG, 2 Sleipner APC tanks, 2 Bulldogs with the LRM variant, an Scout 7J, a Spider 5V, 2 light SRM carriers, and 3 foot platoons with flamethrowers. And I was workshopping some stuff when it came to wheeled and tracked vehicles, and I'll share my thoughts on that at the end. And so, but I didn't just want to run hovercraft and be ultra OP. I wanted to try some other stuff, and I wanted to have more of like a Mad Maxy kind of vibe. And it worked really well because we also had these like team decks, these faction decks, and there were kind of 2 decks. There was a captain's deck where he got 3 cards that he could assign to individual players over the course of each game, and then each person within the faction got an identical faction deck that had like, I don't know, like 10, maybe 12 cards in it that gave you like special abilities throughout the rule or throughout the day. I'm not quite sure what the kind of mechanics and all the other ones were, but over the course of the day, the pirate one was like kind of a balls to the walls, cheat stuff in, potentially do more damage or go faster than your opponent or buff your mechs in the off chance that these like weird modifications you made may damage yourself. For example, there was one that like let your any of your vehicles move an extra 6 inches for a turn because you did these like wild modifications, but then at the end of that you see if you like take a critical hit because like the components fall apart, and that actually came in really well with my wheeled and tracked vehicles, and it kind of skewed the data point on me trying to test that a little bit. But so that would be like an example. And then in the captain's deck we had like funny things, like we were allowed to like make an illegal move, but if we got caught, there was like a punishment, but otherwise we got to keep the move. And then we had like a card that like made our opponents go get us a drink, right? So it was like a fun thing like that. That was kind of goofy and weird. In the lead up to the event, I made like 4 videos, 1 for each faction. I did that kind of voluntarily, but also on behalf of the organizer, my buddy Jairus. And they were like kind of like little mission briefs to like get people in the mood. Some people showed up in costume and cosplay, all this pirates dressed in black. Our buddy Reed dressed as like Caesar with like purple robes and a gold laurel leaf for because he was playing hegemony troops. And so when we were building our lists, like we were encouraged to be really fluffy, like I said, but we were also kind of given some heads up. We weren't told what the missions were, but we were told that like we probably wanted to bring mechs with hands. We probably wanted cargo transport capabilities, and that infantry would be needed in at least one of the missions. So that kind of like for a lot of us told us like, oh, you probably need these foot infantry so you can achieve the mission goals. So they're given out for free, but you also wanted to bring maybe some transports to get them to the objectives, right? Each board also had like special terrain rules. I only played on 3 of the boards, and I'm not quite sure what all the other ones were. But I know like there was a cavern board I didn't play on, and like one of the special rules was like you couldn't jump over the terrain because it was like a ceiling above them. And then if you fired like a big gun, meaning like you did 4 damage or more, you rolled 4 sets of dice or more, there's a chance that there was a cause to cave in and you could take like a critical hit. I played on a spaceport board, and the rule there was if you were VTOLs above height 1 or if you jumped, you could get shot at by anti-aircraft fire. If you were on the desert board, there was a sandstorm, so it was 1 harder to hit anyone over the range of 12. And then there was an industrial board where there were like smokestacks, and if you were close to any terrain with smokestacks, the targets that were within 6 inches were harder to hit. But then there were also some like reactors that you could do damage to, and if you blew them up, they would like do damage to the units around them. It's just like little fun things like that. Like I said, everyone got these faction decks and these captain decks, and they were kind of specifically drawn up and made for the various factions. So I know, like in one of my games, for example, I was playing a hegemony player, and my list is like all like very low point costed stuff. And you had this card that for a turn, if you targeted a unit that cost less points than you, then you got your skill went down 1. So if you were 4, you became a 3, for example. And it was basically like the label of the card was like these space Romans like are like they're better than you, and so if they were like attacking someone who's beneath them, right, then they did more damage, or they were more likely to do damage, for example. So it was like fun little twists like that. The Taurians, I think, were very resilient, for example. The Canopians were like very intelligence driven, things like that. So it was a lot that made it like really interesting, and like really helped you like lean into the lore, and made for some like interesting like outcomes. Like you could really like pour it on one turn, and then your opponent would pour it onto you because they had this like pile of like cards that they could use throughout the game. And you started off with 3, and then every turn you drew another card that you had access to, and then you shuffled them all back together for the next game. And so that was like that and the terrain rules probably made this like like the most fun as far as the narrative side went. But otherwise, so you had 4 people on a team, and then you were playing these series of 3 games, and then your team added up all your points over the course of the game. So in game 1, I played my buddy Jacob, who's a local. Well, everyone was basically local here in Minnesota. There were a couple guys who came over from the foreign country of Wisconsin. There's about 3 guys who came over from there, and but most of them were actually Minnesotans who moved over there. But so Jacob, who's a local guy at my local club, I played against him. He had a awesome hegemony army. He like put like crests on them and gave everyone shields and spears, and really leaned into like the Roman feel of it. And it was just like super fun game. So in that game, we were playing on the port board. And so anytime we jumped, we could get shot at by the AA, like I said. And basically the mission was like a modified King of the Hill. There was like a Comstar like station in the middle of it, like a little bunker or like warehouse, intelligence headquarters. And you had to control that. So you got a point every turn that you controlled that. And the way you controlled it is most weight on that building within 6 inches at the end of every turn. I ended up winning that game, I think 4-1. But it was a super, super tight game. So basically what happened was first turn, I sprinted everything up to try to get onto the objective and get a score first turn. Jacob did this like half sprint, half move to get some shots off. And he did a fair amount of damage to me. Like, all things considered, it wasn't anything crazy. I did get this one card off called Booby Trap. He moved an assassin into the woods, and it let me like do a 4 damage attack die roll on a target skill of 8 against a unit that moved into terrain. So I did that on him. But I was able to score that first turn. And then essentially what I did is he had kind of weighted like the bulk of his firepower to one side. So I threw like a blocking force that was like sacrificial against that. And then I weighted the other side. And essentially what I did is I slowly cleared that side out. And that was my plan, was to clear it out and then engage his heavier stuff. And hopefully by that point have like a weight of firepower and force. What I wasn't expecting is Jacob's dies to betray him completely. And so even though he had weight of firepower against like bulldogs and light artillery servant carriers who have TMM1, he like whiffed most of his shots. And then on my turning fire, I got a bunch of through armor crits, and he had a Cyclops and I think a Battlemaster. And by the end of that shooting, like they basically had taken like multiple MP and like I think some targeting computer hits or whatever. And so they were just like completely like not trash because they still had a lot of hit points, but they were like in pretty bad shape. I had this card that let me cheat my movement in there. And so what I did was the way the card worked is if you got caught, then your opponent could place that unit anywhere on the board. So what I did is I loaded up infantry first turn into a Maxim that had to get out, and it was flamethrower infantry, and I used it to torch a skimmer and do extra damage to it. And so the next turn I loaded it on my first turn, And then the last move of the turn, I moved the skimmer or my hovercraft transport as a maxim, and then I unloaded, and he didn't catch that I had loaded and unloaded in the same turn. And that worked pretty good because then that flamethrower infantry was able to make it into the fight and attack, right, and do all this attacking. There's some other cool stuff. I had like a mech who, like, I think I threw debris with like an Oscout at one point. It was a card I had, and it like got a crit on a Cyclops and like did extra damage to it. And I had another card that like gave me +1 damage. It was like improvised weapons. It gave me like +1 damage on melee attacks. And so I had an Oscout and a spider like ganging up on a unit and doing like all this extra damage in hand-to-hand combat. I had this card that let me get extra armor, and I like put that on my Atlas and basically walked him out there and was like, go ahead, waste your shots. I got 21 points of damage and like 13 of it's on my armor section. Like, it was great. I ended up winning that 4-1 and our team, or 5-1, because we were max of 5 points per round. And our team did really good. We went 5-1, 5-0, I think 4-2 and 1-2 or something like that. So we ended up being in the lead that turn with like 15 points, and it was a fun game. Jacob does all this really cool, like especially for narrative stuff. He'll build like custom forces and like really deck them out and lean into it. So that was a lot of fun. So in game 2, I played Reed, who we call Smiley, and he was cosplaying as the Emperor or a Caesar. And I specifically called him out because I've always wanted to play Reed, and I've never had a chance to play him. And he's super fun and really leans into the lore. He always like dresses up and like brings extra little things, like with this Merrick Civil War event. And he brought like these flyers about Merrick propaganda and things like that. So we were playing on there were 2 desert boards. We were playing on that. And what you had to do was like steal these mechs, and you needed your infantry to do that. And so he's also a Marian player. So there's going to be a theme here. So I've played 2 Space Romans so far. So we had to steal these 3 mechs. There were 3 Comstar mechs in the middle of the board. And the way you stole them is infantry and base-to-base contact. And if there were no enemy infantry and base-to-base contact at the end of the turn, the infantry dropped off their pilots and picked up those mechs. And then if you could get them off the board, you got points for getting them off the board. If you stole them, you got points for that. But if your opponent destroyed them after you captured them, they got points for that. So we YOLO'd up the board as quick as we could. We deposited a bunch of our infantry close to mechs by the end of turn 2. I tried to do some shenanigans, and he kind of caught on to it, and he blocked me from being able to challenge one of his infantry from I had him like out of place. I felt like I had him in a really good spot, and I was going to deposit my flamethrower infantry next to his infantry, and no one but his infantry was going to be able to shoot my infantry. And he couldn't kill him because it was just like LRM infantry. But I had flamethrower infantry with its transport, and I was going to kill it and steal this javelin. But he kind of sussed me out and put a blocking force in to stop me from getting there. And essentially what happened is we wiped out all of our infantry in the middle of the board and on my right flank. And then I had 1 infantry uncontested on, I want to say it was a guillotine on the left side of my board. And he had 1 unit that could see him. And the 1 unit was a Centurion that only did 2 damage. I could take 3. I was like, I got this mech. It's mine. It's mine for the taking. And he goes to play his cards during the shooting phase, and he got that one that made your skill lower if it was you were targeting something that was lower point cost than you. And then he got this card that was like, I think it was called like more missiles or all the missiles or chest full of missiles. And he got to add like 5 attacks to his medium range damage for 1 turn. And he just smoked my infantry off the board. So then all of our infantry was dead. I got this card that was like volatile ammunition. And basically it gave you +1 damage at short and medium. And that damage was heat damage. And I put it on my infantry because it caused crits, but it wasn't specific to the type of unit. And so my infantry for 1 turn got to throw 2/2 heat. And it was brutal, like just cooking stuff off. And it was super cool. I was like, load the plasma into the tanks, boys. We're going to a barbecue. It was so much fun. So then we looked at it and we're like, well, let's see if we can table each other. And they basically did that. Like, we just went like round for round, like killing stuff, like pretty rough. I had these, the Sleipnirs, I was using these battle buses from Drop Zone Commander, and they were doing really well. But like he like ripped one apart with a Centurion. Like they were getting just like slammed. And then I got behind like a bunch of his heavy stuff and was able to wipe them out. And at the end, I managed to get this card that like made all my vehicles go like 6 inches faster. and those vehicles were able to like keep up because I killed like all of his really heavy stuff, but he had all this really fast hover stuff left, and I just could not keep up with it. But that card like saved my bacon because basically I could get my 8-inch move like bulldogs and light SRM carriers like moving 14. But I didn't pick up TMM because the way the card read, it was like you were just making modifications and like stuff's falling off your card, because you could at the end of that take critical hits and like damage from like basically like putting like extra NOS in the tank. So at the end of the game, I had like 2 units left. He had like 4 units left. It was like he had like a Multier and like a really 2 Multiers and like a really damaged Maxim and like a Cicada. And I had like 1 Battle Bus and I think my Grasshopper left. And the final score was, I think, 282 to 265 or something like that. But he had a card that made one of his mechs cost only half points, right? And he played it on his Victor, which the Victor went from, 36 down to 18. And he ended up winning 265 to 264 just on MOV. So it was 0-0, and I lost by 1. It was pretty terrible. And the rest of my team also did equally terrible in that turn, and nobody scored a single point. So we were stuck at the end of round 2 with just 15 points, which was good because I think we were probably in second at that point, or maybe still in first because we did so well first round. And not a lot of people captured mechs, to be honest with you, in that first round. It was really hard to pull off. I think not playing any of the missions before, and we'll get into this when I do my rue, like not playing before, you had to kind of like come up with your tactics on the fly. Whereas like if this was like a mission you had played a bunch from like some scenario book, like you'd know how to play these a lot better. So my last round, I played my buddy Bob Mahoney, and it was like a supply run mission. I was on an industrial board. So the special rules on the industrial board were if you were within 6 inches of these smokestacks, it was harder to hit you. And then there was like a reactor. And if you blew that thing up, like everyone within a certain amount of range took automatic damage. This was basically like a modified capture the flag, where it had a King of the Hill 5-inch objective marker in the middle that had supplies in it, and it was considered a height 1. Like you went inside of there to capture supplies, and when you're inside, you couldn't be seen. But if you were inside with other people, you could see them and attack them inside, like you were going inside this warehouse and stealing supplies, and then you had to get back and cache those supplies. But in order to pick them up, you either had to be able to transport cargo, not infantry, but cargo, or you had to have hands. And if you had hands, you could only pick up your size in supplies, where if you had cargo, you picked up your cargo capacity. So if you had like a cargo capacity of 8, you could pick up 8 supplies, and you needed 4 supplies to score a point. So Bob did not bring transports for his infantry, which that may not seem like a big deal, but I had flamethrower infantry, and I was able to get into that middle bunker like very quickly, which made it like a death trap for anything that came in. And Bob had put a couple units inside there when I had like an Oscout, an Ossel, and a Grasshopper in there. And then I used that volatile ammunition again to just take my flamethrowers to like the next level. And it was basically downhill from there for Bob. I wasn't able to score a lot. I think I only scored like 1 point when it was all said and done, because it did take a lot of effort to get there and back to the objective, because the rules were you couldn't sprint to pick. The turn you sprinted, you couldn't pick up an objective, and you also couldn't deposit an objective. I think that was just for fairness sake. But I did end up winning, and I think I killed almost all of Bob's stuff by the end of it. But a lot of cool cards came up in that. A lot of fun action came up in that. So placement, we scored, I think, 4 points between our whole team on the third round. We got 19 points, and the Canopians got 20 points. So we ended up taking second to the Canopians and the Cat Ladies, which was kind of a bummer, but also we still had a ton of fun. The decks were awesome. It might have been the highlight of the whole event. It was just great having like some terrain special rules, and they weren't like overbearing. It was just like little things that made it a lot of fun. The missions were pretty good. We had some suggestions, and I know Jairus is probably going to rework them. He said like the hardest thing is he didn't want people to know the missions, and which means like it's very hard to play test those beforehand. But for the most part, they worked really, really well. It was a lot of like head to the middle, brawl it out, and then get something off your board, at least for 2 of the missions. And I thought it was fine, honestly. I thought they were great. I mean, it was really fluffy, right? And it was supposed to be like you're stealing Comstar stuff, and it worked really well for that. Workshop wise, it's hard to tell on the wheeled and track stuff. So essentially, I was running one of the Sleipnir APCs, a light LRM carrier or SRM carrier, and a Bulldog LRM carrier all together. And my thought was like, well, it does 17 health and it does 8 at medium. And it's still like averaging like speed 8, speed 10, somewhere in there. And so like that's basically just a little bit more than an Atlas. Like you would buy a mech that was like that. So let's see how this does. It's hard to tell though, because I had so many good cards that like boosted them. And I don't know how they would do like just on their own without those cards. But I will say this, they work pretty good. They're not fast. And that was like the hardest thing, was like not being mobile to react to stuff. But I think if you play that stuff right, there's a potential place for it. I don't know if it's super competitive, but it does work. Like your opponent doesn't really want to be shooting that stuff, right? Because a lot of it's like not threatening objectives, but they also can't ignore it. Like there's a turn where I was 7 inches out from that 6-inch objective in game 1, and Jacob was like, I don't really want to shoot this, light SRM carrier, but he kind of had to because it's dropping 3 rounds into like him or into one of his mechs. And so I think there's probably a place. I don't know that I would run like 2 balls of those things in an event, but I could see a place where you run like a bulldog supported by a light LRM carrier, like just kind of hunting, like moving 8, sneaking around, providing extra support, because it's like a really efficient way. Because it's 21 points for the bulldog and it was 16 points for the light SRM carrier. So what is that? 37 points, and you're getting 6 damage at medium for 10 health. The problem is you're just teaming 1, and then it's very easy to kill, especially like the light SRM carrier. It's very easy to kill that thing, and you do take crits pretty quick. And when you're wheels, you take motives a lot more. But it worked. I mean, it worked. I won 2 of my games, and I would have won the 3rd on MOV if it wasn't for that silly card. But it is hard to tell because I had these cards that also boosted them, right? Like moving them 14 inches because you get a +6 move on your vehicles for a turn. Like that kind of skews the numbers. And then there were also times that like there were some things that did extra damage as well. But overall, it was a lot of fun. It was really cool. If you haven't played like narrative events like that or tried them out, I really encourage you to do so. Even if it's just against like one friend for an afternoon, you play like a series of 3 games. Like it's just a different way to play, and it's very casual, non-competitive. Like everyone came ready to just like roll dice and have fun, not to like compete and be top dog. And that was like really relaxing, especially after playing an Adepticon. So if you haven't done that, I'd really encourage you to do that. Like explore like the lore and the narrative, and like use your imagination, look for ideas online. If you have done that, share in the comments below. Otherwise, may the blessings of Blake be upon you.